Every veteran knows that coming home is harder than going to war. For Derek Rains, home meant trading his uniform for coveralls, his squad for solitude, and his mission for the simple rhythm of fixing engines at a small-town garage in Oregon. 5 years after leaving the Army, Derek thought he'd found peace in his quiet cabin. But the small bump that appeared on his leg 3 weeks ago wasn't healing right. What started as something he figured was just a spider bite had grown into something strange. The skin around it turned gray, and sometimes he swore he could feel it moving under the surface. When Derek finally walked into the Millfield Clinic, Dr. Sarah Chen was expecting another routine case. She pulled back his bandage and immediately stepped backward, her face draining of all color. Her hands began to shake as she stared at what was growing beneath his skin. What could make an experienced doctor freeze in complete terror at the sight of a simple sore? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the dusty windows of Murphy's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Derek Rains had spent the better part of 5 years, rebuilding carburetors and replacing brake pads. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal shavings had become his sanctuary, a world away from the classified briefings and midnight operations that had defined his previous life. Derek's calloused hands moved with practiced precision as he adjusted the timing on a 1998 Ford pickup. At 44, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen too much but learned to value simple things. His brown hair had started showing silver at the temples, and the lines around his green eyes spoke of both laughter and worry. The townspeople of Millfield knew him as a reliable mechanic who kept to himself, paid his bills on time, and never caused trouble. What they didn't know was that Sergeant First Class Derek Rains had spent 12 years in the Army's most secretive environmental surveillance unit, traveling to places that didn't appear on civilian maps and investigating contamination sites that government agencies preferred to forget. His military service record, locked away in classified files 3 layers deep, told a different story than the quiet man who now lived in a modest cabin on Pine Ridge Road. Old Murphy emerged from his cramped office, wiping grease from his hands with a red shop rag that had seen better decades. At 72, Frank Murphy moved with the careful deliberation of a man whose body had logged too many hours under car hoods, but his mind remained sharp as the day he'd opened the garage in 1975. "Derek, you've been favoring that left leg all morning," Murphy observed, settling his considerable frame against the workbench. "Something bothering you?" Derek paused in his work, unconsciously shifting his weight to his right side. The sore on his leg had been throbbing since dawn, a persistent ache that seemed to pulse with its own rhythm. Just an old injury acting up, nothing serious. Murphy's weathered face creased with concern. "Old injuries have a way of reminding us they're still there. You might want to have Doc Chen take a look at it." The suggestion made Derek's stomach tighten. He'd been avoiding medical attention for 3 weeks, telling himself the strange mark on his leg would heal on its own. Military training had taught him to push through discomfort, to treat his body as equipment that needed to function regardless of minor malfunctions. But this felt different, not like the familiar ache of old shrapnel or the protest of joints that had carried too much weight across too many miles. "I'll think about it," Derek said, returning his attention to the truck's engine. Murphy studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and shuffled back to his office. The old man had a gift for knowing when to push and when to let things be. It was one of the reasons Derek had stayed at the garage longer than he'd stayed anywhere since leaving the service. The bell above the front door chimed, announcing the arrival of Mrs. Henderson with her temperamental Honda. Derek welcomed the distraction, focusing on the routine interaction with a longtime customer. These daily encounters had become his anchor to civilian life conversations about weather and grandchildren, complaints about rising gas prices, the gentle rhythm of a community that moved at its own unhurried pace. But as the day wore on, the discomfort in his leg intensified. During his lunch break, Derek retreated to the small bathroom at the back of the garage and carefully rolled up his pant leg. The sight that greeted him made his breath catch in his throat. What had started as a small dark spot 3 weeks ago had expanded to the size of a silver dollar. The skin around it had taken on an unsettling grayish hue, like old meat left too long in the sun. But it was the texture that disturbed him most. The surface seemed to shift slightly when he wasn't looking directly at it, and he could swear. He felt a faint pulsing beneath the skin, as if something was moving inside. Derek pressed his fingertips around the edges of the affected area. The skin felt different, thicker somehow, but also strangely sensitive. When he applied pressure, he could have sworn he heard a faint sound, like air escaping from a small puncture. A memory flickered at the edge of his consciousness, something about skin discoloration and tissue changes. But when he tried to focus on it, the thoughts slipped away like smoke. His military medical training had covered field treatment for chemical exposure, but this didn't match any syndrome he remembered. That evening, Derek sat on the front porch of his cabin, nursing a beer, and watching the sun set behind the Douglas firs that surrounded his property. The cabin wasn't much: 2 bedrooms, a kitchen barely large enough for one person, and a living room dominated by a stone fireplace he'd built himself the first winter. But it was his, purchased with money he'd saved during years of overseas deployments when there was nothing to spend his pay on except books and letters home to no one in particular. The isolation had been intentional. After discharge, Derek had tried city life for 6 months, renting a small apartment in Portland and working at a dealership that serviced luxury cars. But the noise and crowds had left him feeling exposed, constantly scanning for threats that existed only in the hypervigilant corners of his mind. The cabin offered something his soul had craved: silence broken only by wind through trees, and the occasional call of a barn owl. His nearest neighbor, Rita Kozlov, lived half a mile down the mountain road. She was a retired teacher who'd moved to Oregon after her husband died, seeking the same kind of solitude that had drawn Derek. They developed an easy friendship built on mutual respect for personal space and the occasional shared dinner when loneliness got the better of either of them. Derek's phone buzzed with a text for Rita. "Saw your porch light on. Everything all right up there?" He smiled despite his discomfort. Rita had an uncanny ability to sense when something was bothering him, probably a skill developed from 30 years of teaching middle school students. "All good," he texted back. "Just thinking." "Dangerous habit," came her quick reply. "Want company for thinking?" Derek considered the offer. Rita's straightforward manner and gentle humor had a way of putting things in perspective. But tonight, he wasn't sure he was ready to explain the growing anxiety that had been building since his discovery in the garage bathroom. "Rain check?" He typed. "Always," she responded, followed by a heart emoji that somehow didn't feel awkward coming from a 70-year-old former English teacher. As darkness settled over the forest, Derek found himself dwelling on fragments of memory that seemed to hover just beyond reach. Images of men in hazmat suits, the acrid smell of chemical-soaked earth, and a voice speaking in accented English about things that should not be disturbed. But when he tried to pin down the specifics, they scattered like startled deer. His service had ended abruptly, not with ceremony or fanfare, but with a brief meeting in a windowless office where a colonel he'd never seen before had handed him discharge papers and a reminder that certain aspects of his military experience were classified in perpetuity. The debriefing had lasted exactly 14 minutes, most of which involved him signing documents promising never to discuss operations that officially had never happened. Derek had left that office with a sense of unfinished business, as if he'd been in the middle of reading a book when someone tore out the final chapters. His Unit 12 specialists in environmental threat assessment had been disbanded without explanation. His teammates had scattered to different bases or civilian life, and attempts to maintain contact had been politely but firmly discouraged. Now, sitting in the growing darkness with something alien pulsing beneath his skin, those scattered memories felt more urgent. Whatever was happening to him, he had the unsettling feeling it was connected to those final months of service that remained locked behind walls of classification and bureaucratic silence. Derek finished his beer and stood to go inside, wincing, as weight settled on his left leg. Tomorrow, he decided, he would swallow his pride and make an appointment with Dr. Chen. The young doctor had treated him twice before, once for a gash from a sheet metal accident and another time for what turned out to be walking pneumonia that he'd stubbornly tried to cure with rest and whiskey. Dr. Sarah Chen had moved to Millfield 2 years ago, fresh out of residency and drawn by a federal program that helped pay off medical school loans in exchange for service in underserved rural areas. She was thorough, patient, and refreshingly direct in her approach to medicine. If anyone could make sense of what was happening to his leg, it would be her. As Derek locked the cabin door behind him, he caught his reflection in the hallway mirror. His face looked tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. There was something in his eyes, a wariness that he recognized from his military days, when danger could come from any direction and the difference between paranoia and survival was often measured in milliseconds. Whatever was growing beneath his skin, Derek realized it was just the beginning of something much larger. The thought should have frightened him more than it did. Instead, it felt almost familiar, like the moment before a mission briefing when you knew your life was about to change but didn't yet know how. He climbed the stairs to his bedroom, where framed photographs on the nightstand showed him with men, whose names he was no longer supposed to remember, in places that officially didn't exist on any map. In the morning, he would make that appointment with Dr. Chen, but tonight, he would lie awake remembering the faces of teammates who had vanished from his life as completely as if they had never existed at all. Derek woke to pain that felt like fire spreading through his leg. The bedside clock showed 3:17 a.m., its red digits blurring as he struggled to focus through waves of discomfort that seemed to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. The sheet beneath his left leg felt damp, and when he reached down to investigate, his fingers came away sticky with something that wasn't quite blood. He stumbled to the bathroom and switched on the harsh fluorescent light, then carefully rolled up his pajama pants. What he saw made his knees buckle. The grayish area had tripled in size overnight, spreading across his calf like spilled ink. But worse than the discoloration was the texture. The skin had developed a honeycomb pattern of small, dark pockets that seemed to extend deep beneath the surface. When he leaned closer, he could see faint movement within those pockets, as if something was stirring in the depths. Derek's military training kicked in, overriding the surge of panic. He photographed the affected area with his phone, documenting the changes with the same methodical approach he'd once used for contamination reports. Then he cleaned the seepage with hydrogen peroxide, noting that the liquid fizzed more violently than it should have, releasing a smell like ozone after lightning. By dawn, he was sitting in the Millfield Clinic parking lot, waiting for Dr. Chen to arrive. The night had stretched endlessly, filled with half-remembered dreams of masked figures and the sound of Geiger counters clicking in steady rhythm. When sleep finally came, it brought visions of underground chambers and the feeling of earth that moved beneath his feet with unnatural life. Dr. Sarah Chen pulled into the parking lot at exactly 7:30 a.m., her compact Honda Civic as reliable as its owner. She was a small woman in her early 30s, with intelligent dark eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of focused energy that came from genuine care for her patients. When she spotted Derek's truck, she quickened her pace. Derek? I wasn't expecting you until this afternoon. She'd agreed to see him as her first appointment, sensing the urgency in his voice when he'd called at sunrise. It got worse, he said simply, following her into the clinic. The examination room smelled of antiseptic and fresh paint. Dr. Chen had been gradually updating the facility since her arrival, bringing both modern equipment and a level of care that the previous doctor, nearing retirement, had been unable to maintain. Derek settled onto the examination table, the paper crinkling beneath him as Dr. Chen washed her hands and pulled on latex gloves. "Tell me when this started," she said, preparing her instruments with practiced efficiency. 3 weeks ago. Small spot, like a spider bite. I'd been keeping it clean, using antibiotic ointment. Derek's voice carried the matter-of-fact tone he'd learned in the military. REPORTING symptoms, like tactical intelligence. Dr. Chen nodded and carefully rolled up his pant leg. Her expression remained neutral as she took in the extent of the discoloration. But Derek caught the slight tightening around her eyes. She'd seen something that concerned her. "I'm going to remove the bandage now," she said gently. "Let me know if you experience any unusual sensations." The moment the adhesive pulled away from his skin, Dr. Chen stepped backward so quickly she nearly knocked over her rolling stool. Her face went white as paper, and Derek heard her sharp intake of breath. "Dr. Chen, what is it?" She stood frozen for several seconds, staring at his leg with an expression Derek had seen before, the look of someone confronting something that challenged their understanding of the world. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her examination light. "I need to call someone," she said quietly. "Derek, this is unlike anything I've seen in medical literature." The honeycomb pattern was more pronounced under the bright light, and Derek could see that the dark pockets weren't just surface abnormalities. They extended deep into his tissue, forming a complex network that resembled nothing so much as a hive. As Dr. Chen leaned closer with a magnifying glass, some of the pockets seemed to respond to the light, contracting slightly as if seeking darkness. "It's moving," she whispered, more to herself than to Derek. "I know," Derek replied. "It started last night." Dr. Chen set down her magnifying glass and looked directly into Derek's eyes. "Derek, I need you to be completely honest with me. Have you been exposed to any unusual chemicals, radiation, biological agents?" The questions hit him like ice water. Fragments of memory crashed together: hazmat suits, contaminated soil, and a mission briefing that had been classified beyond his clearance level. He saw himself and 11 other soldiers standing around a crater that shouldn't have existed, watching scientists in full protective gear collect samples of Earth that glowed with its own sickly light. "I was in the Army," Derek said slowly. "Environmental Surveillance Unit. We investigated contamination sites overseas." "When did you serve?" "Discharged 5 years ago. But the last mission..." Derek's voice trailed off as more details surfaced. A village that had been evacuated overnight. Local guides who spoke in whispers about soil that had turned black and started moving. Team members who had removed their protective gear despite protocols, claiming the air monitors showed no dangerous readings. "Derek?" Dr. Chen's voice seemed to come from very far away. "I need to make some calls," he said, sliding off the examination table. There were others with me. "If this is connected to our service..." Dr. Chen placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Derek, you're not leaving this clinic until I understand what we're dealing with. This could be contagious. It could be dangerous to others." "It's not contagious," Derek said with sudden certainty. "This is something specific. Something that was done to us." As if triggered by his words, his phone rang. The number was blocked, but something about the timing made Derek's pulse quicken. He answered on the second ring. "Derek Rains?" The voice was crisp, professional, with the kind of authority that didn't waste time on pleasantries. Who is this? Someone who's been expecting your call to medical personnel. You need to listen carefully, Sergeant Rains. Do not allow any samples to be taken. Do not submit to any advanced testing. Report to the federal building in Portland by 0800 tomorrow for debriefing. Derek felt the familiar chill of classified operations, the weight of secrets that could reshape reality with a single phone call. I'm not active duty anymore. Your service record indicates otherwise. You and your unit remain subject to recall for matters of national security. 24 hours, Sergeant. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. The line went dead. Dr. Chen had been watching Derek's face throughout the conversation. Who was that? I don't know, Derek lied. But they knew about my condition. They knew I was here. Derek, whatever this is, you need medical attention. I'm calling specialists in Portland, maybe Seattle. This tissue pattern, I've never seen anything like it outside of certain deep-sea organisms. Deep-sea organisms? The phrase triggered another memory, a briefing slide, showing microscopic structures that resembled the patterns now growing in his leg. But the context remained frustratingly out of reach. Locked behind walls of classification that had been reinforced by 5 years of civilian life. Derek looked down at his leg, at the alien architecture that was slowly transforming. His flesh. Dr. Chen was right. This was unlike anything in standard medical literature, but it wasn't unlike everything he'd encountered in his military service. The patterns were familiar in a way that made his stomach turn. I need to go, he said, carefully rewrapping his leg. There are people I have to contact. Others who might be affected. Derek, please, let me help you. He paused at the examination room door. You can help by being very careful who you talk to about this. If I'm right, asking the wrong questions could put you in danger. As Derek left the clinic, Dr. Chen stood in the empty examination room, staring at the bandage he'd left behind. Even in the absence of the patient, she could see faint traces of the strange seepage, and she could have sworn she detected movement beneath the gauze. She made 2 decisions simultaneously. She would research everything she could find about unusual tissue formations and military medical experiments, and she would document everything in case Derek Rains never came back. Outside, Derek sat in his truck for several minutes, processing the implications of the phone call. Someone had been monitoring medical facilities, waiting for veterans from his unit to seek treatment. The question was whether that someone was trying to help them or silence them. He started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading not toward home, but toward the storage unit on the outskirts of town, where he kept the few military items he hadn't been able to throw away. It was time to dig deeper into a past that officially no longer existed. The storage unit smelled of mothballs and rust, filled with the detritus of a military career that had ended without ceremony or explanation. Derek picked his way through boxes of field manuals and combat gear, searching for the small aluminum case he'd hidden beneath winter clothing he rarely used. When his fingers finally closed around the familiar weight, 5 years of civilian life seemed to fall away. Inside the case, wrapped in an old army t-shirt, was an encrypted communications device that officially had never existed. The XQ7 looked like an oversized satellite phone, its matte black surface unmarked by any manufacturer's logo or identifying numbers. Derek had kept it despite direct orders to surrender all unit equipment, driven by an instinct he couldn't explain at the time. Now, as he powered up the device for the first time since his discharge, that instinct felt prophetic. The XQ7 connected to a classified military network that operated parallel to civilian communications systems. Derek entered his old authentication codes, half expecting them to have been deactivated years ago. Instead, the device hummed to life, its screen displaying a familiar interface that made his chest tighten with recognition. 17 unread messages waited for him, all from call signs he recognized. The first was from Viper Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb, the unit's explosive specialist who had been Derek's closest friend during their years of service. The message was 3 months old. "Phoenix, if you're reading this, we need to talk. Something's happening to us. Check Secure Channel 7. Derek's fingers trembled as he scrolled through the remaining messages. Ghost, Ranger, Nomad teammates, whose real names he'd been ordered to forget, were all trying to reach him. The most recent message was from 2 weeks ago, sent by someone using the callsign Whisper. "Phoenix, they got Rodriguez." Made it look like a car accident, but his wife said he'd been asking questions about the Marsh mission. "Be careful who you trust." The Marsh mission. The memory hit Derek like a physical blow, sudden and overwhelming. They'd been deployed to a remote region where 3 villages had been evacuated due to what official reports called industrial contamination. But when Derek's unit arrived, they'd found something that defied every protocol in their environmental assessment handbook. The contaminated area wasn't just toxic, it was alive. The soil had formed structures that resembled neural networks, spreading in complex patterns that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm. Local guides, speaking through interpreters, had called it Earth that dreams and warned that it was growing stronger. The contamination was expanding at a rate that violated every known model of chemical or radiological spread. Derek remembered the moment when their team leader, Captain Rodriguez, had made the decision to investigate the source. They'd descended into what looked like a natural crater, but had walls that curved with too much geometric precision. At the bottom, they'd found chambers carved from living rock, filled with a substance that registered on their instruments as simultaneously organic and mineral. Rodriguez had been the first to remove his protective gear, insisting that their air quality monitors showed safe readings. Within hours, the entire team had followed suit, driven by a strange compulsion to make direct contact with the alien architecture surrounding them. The next 72 hours remained frustratingly unclear. In Derek's memory, he recalled feeling euphoric, as if he'd discovered something magnificent. There had been dreams or possibly visions of vast networks spreading beneath continents, of consciousness older than human civilization reaching out through living stone. But when the evacuation order came, all he retained were fragments and the persistent feeling that they'd been changed by the experience. Derek shook his head, forcing himself back to the present. He activated Channel 7 and sent a brief message. "Phoenix online. Confirm status of all personnel." The response came within minutes. "Phoenix, this is Viper. Thank God. Are you experiencing symptoms?" "Affirmative. You?" "Started 6 months ago. Thought I was dying until I connected with Nomad. He's been researching. Says it's not a disease." Derek stared at the screen, processing the implications. If other team members were experiencing similar changes, then his mysterious phone call made more sense. Someone had been tracking them, waiting for symptoms to manifest. "Viper, has anyone made official contact?" Rodriguez was asking questions through proper channels right before his accident. "Since then, we've been operating under communication blackout protocols." Derek understood. Communication blackout meant treating all official channels as compromised, relying only on encrypted networks that existed outside normal military hierarchy. It was a protocol reserved for situations where the chain of command itself might be hostile. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Rains, my name is Sarah Martinez. I'm an investigative journalist with the Portland Tribune. I'd like to discuss your military service and recent medical concerns. This conversation could be mutually beneficial." Derek stared at the message, his training warning him against contact with media, while his instincts suggested that outside attention might be his only protection against whatever forces were already tracking him. Before he could respond, the XQ7 chimed with another message from Viper. Phoenix, recommend immediate face-to-face meeting. Information too sensitive for electronic transmission. Can you reach the old camping spot by 1900 hours? The camping spot was code for a location they'd used during survival training, an abandoned fire tower 30 miles east of Millfield. Derek checked his watch. 2:30 p.m. That gave him 4.5 hours to prepare for a meeting that would either provide answers or walk him into a trap. He powered down the communications device and locked it back in its case, then spent several minutes examining the other contents of his storage unit. Buried beneath dress uniforms and commendation certificates he'd never displayed was a manila envelope marked with his name and service number. Inside were photographs from the Marsh mission images that had never appeared in any official report. Derek studied them with growing unease, noting details that his conscious memory had suppressed. In one photo, he could see himself and his teammates standing inside one of the underground chambers, their faces showing expressions of wonder rather than the caution that proper contamination protocols demanded. But it was the last photograph that made his breath catch. The image showed the chamber walls up close, revealing a pattern of hexagonal structures that were unmistakably identical to what was now growing in his leg. Derek's phone rang again. This time, he recognized the number Dr. Chen was calling from. The clinic. Derek, I need you to come back immediately. I've been researching your condition, and I found something you need to see. What kind of something? I can't discuss it over the phone. But Derek, you're not the first patient I've treated with these symptoms. The statement hit him like ice water. What do you mean? There was another man, about 2 years ago. Different presentation, but the same underlying tissue patterns. He was also a veteran, also served overseas in environmental roles. Derek gripped the phone tighter. What happened to him? He disappeared. Left town suddenly, right after I'd scheduled him for advanced testing. But Derek, before he left, he gave me something to hold for him. Something he said other members of his unit might come looking for. Dr. Chen, listen to me carefully. Don't discuss this with anyone else. Don't file any reports. Can you meet me somewhere other than the clinic? Derek, what's going on? I'm not sure yet, but I think we're both in more danger than we realize. As Derek ended the call and prepared to leave the storage facility, he couldn't shake the feeling that forces much larger than his individual situation were beginning to converge. The mysterious phone call, his teammates' messages, and now Dr. Chen's revelation about another veteran. It all pointed to a conspiracy that had been years in the making. He locked the storage unit and headed for his truck, his mind already planning the conversation he would have with Marcus Webb at the abandoned fire tower. After 5 years of silence, it was time to piece together what had really happened during those lost 72 hours in the marsh. The abandoned fire tower stood against the evening sky like a skeletal finger, its metal framework corroded by decades of mountain weather. Derek arrived 30 minutes early, using the time to scout the surrounding forest for signs of surveillance. His military training had taught him that the most dangerous meetings were often the most necessary ones. Marcus Webb emerged from the tree line at exactly 1900 hours, moving with the same careful precision Derek remembered from their years of service. At 39, Marcus had retained the compact build and alert posture of a career soldier, though civilian clothes couldn't entirely disguise the predatory awareness in his movements. They embraced briefly, the kind of greeting shared by men who had trusted each other with their lives in places where such trust meant survival. You look like hell, Phoenix, Marcus said, using Derek's old cal sign with familiar ease. You should see what's under the bandage, Derek replied. How long have you been dealing with this? Marcus rolled up his right sleeve, revealing skin that had developed the same honeycomb pattern Derek recognized from his own condition. But Marcus's transformation was more advanced. The hexagonal structures covered his entire forearm and seemed to pulse with faint bioluminescence in the growing darkness. 6 months, Marcus said. Started as a small spot on my wrist. Now it's spreading up toward my shoulder. Derek examined his friend's arm more closely. Does it hurt? Not exactly. More like awareness. I can feel things through it that I shouldn't be able to feel. Yesterday, I touched a tree, and I swear I could sense the water moving up through its roots. The statement should have sounded insane, but Derek found himself nodding in understanding. Since the morning's dramatic expansion, he'd been experiencing similar sensations, a heightened sensitivity to his environment that felt both alien and oddly natural. Marcus, I need to show you something. Derek pulled out one of the photographs from his storage unit, the image that showed the chamber walls during their Marsh mission. Look familiar? Marcus studied the photo under the beam of his flashlight, his expression growing grave. Jesus Christ, Derek, it's identical to what's growing in us. That's what I thought. Question is, how much do you remember about those 72 hours? Fragments, dreams, maybe. I remember feeling like we'd found something incredible, something that could change everything. But the details, Marcus shook his head. It's like trying to remember a conversation that happened underwater. Derek sat on a fallen log, wincing, as the movement aggravated his condition. Someone called me today. Government authority knew about my symptoms, ordered me to report for debriefing in Portland. They contacted me too, 3 days ago. Said failure to comply would result in involuntary recall to active duty. Are you going? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the first stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Derek, I found something. About what really happened during the mission. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a sealed plastic bag containing what looked like a soil sample. But under Derek's flashlight, the sample revealed the same geometric patterns they were seeing in their own tissue. I went back, Marcus said quietly. Not to the original site, that would be impossible. But I researched the coordinates, cross-referenced them with geological surveys and environmental reports. The marsh wasn't a contamination site, Derek. It was an excavation. Excavation of what? Something that had been buried for a very long time. The local guides weren't warning us about industrial toxins. They were trying to tell us we were disturbing something that should have stayed hidden. Derek felt pieces of memory shifting, like puzzle fragments finally finding their proper places. The structures underground, they weren't natural formations. No, and they weren't recent either. Carbon dating on samples taken from similar sites suggests they're thousands of years old. Maybe tens of thousands. Sites? There are others? Marcus nodded grimly. At least 7 that I've been able to identify, scattered across different continents. All excavated during the past decade, all under the pretext of environmental cleanup or archaeological research. And Derek, every site had military personnel involved in the investigation. Personnel like us? Exactly like us. Environmental specialists, hazmat-trained security clearances that kept us isolated from normal command structures. Derek processed this information, feeling the weight of implications that stretched far beyond their individual situations. Marcus, how many of our unit are still alive? As of 2 weeks ago? 5, including us. Rodriguez, Hendricks, and Torres are confirmed dead all within the past 8 months, all under circumstances that arouse suspicion from family members. And the others? Nomad and Ghost are still alive, both experiencing symptoms similar to ours. Whisper and I have been maintaining communication through encrypted channels, but we lost contact with him 4 days ago. Derek stood and began pacing, his mind working through tactical possibilities. If they're eliminating team members systematically, then reporting for official debriefing is essentially signing our death warrants. That was my conclusion as well. But Derek, there's something else you need to know. Marcus hesitated, as if weighing the implications of his next words. The symptoms aren't random. They're following a pattern, and that pattern suggests we weren't just exposed to something during the mission. We were infected with it intentionally. Intentionally? You're talking about human experimentation. I'm talking about something much more complex than that. Derek, what if the marsh wasn't the source of the contamination? What if it was designed to create the contamination? The question hung in the air between them, carrying implications that challenged everything Derek thought. He understood about their military service. If Marcus was right, then they hadn't been investigating environmental damage. They'd been participating in some kind of biological transformation project. There's someone else involved, Derek said, remembering Dr. Chen's phone call. A doctor in town has been treating another veteran with similar symptoms, someone who served in environmental roles overseas. Which unit? I don't know yet. But she said he disappeared after she scheduled advanced testing, and he left something for other veterans who might come looking for him. Marcus checked his watch. How much do you trust this doctor? She saved my life once. During a bout with pneumonia, I was too stubborn to treat properly. More importantly, she's asking the right questions and documenting everything. Then, we need to talk to her before we make any decisions about the government contact. Derek, if we're right about this being a systematic program, then we need allies outside the military structure. People who can't be silenced through official channels. As they prepared to leave the fire tower, Derek felt his condition pulse with sudden intensity. For a moment, he could have sworn he sensed something vast and patient stirring beneath the earth, responding to their conversation as if it had been listening. Marcus, he said quietly, I think whatever they did to us, it's not finished yet. Dr. Sarah Chen's office after hours felt different from the clinical efficiency of daytime appointments. The harsh fluorescent lights were dimmed, replaced by the warm glow of her desk lamp, and the usual bustle of patients and staff had given way to an almost conspiratorial quiet. Derek and Marcus sat across from her desk while she examined a manila envelope with hands that trembled slightly. His name was James Kowalski, Dr. Chen said, breaking the seal on the envelope. Served with the 23rd Chemical Detection Company. Deployed to Eastern Europe in 2018. When he came to me 2 years ago, he was experiencing symptoms identical to what you've described, Derek. She withdrew a thick folder filled with medical photographs and handwritten notes. The images showed tissue formations that were unmistakably similar to Derek's condition, but more advanced. The honeycomb patterns covered entire limbs and appeared to extend deep into the patient's torso. James was convinced that someone was tracking veterans from his unit, Dr. Chen continued. He'd received phone calls similar to yours, Derek. Orders to report for medical evaluation that he was certain were actually attempts to silence him. Marcus leaned forward, studying the photographs. What happened to him? He left town suddenly, right after I'd scheduled him for MRI imaging. But before he disappeared, he gave me this envelope and made me promise to share its contents with any other veterans who came asking similar questions. Dr. Chen opened a second folder, revealing documents that looked like they'd been photocopied from classified sources. At the top of the first page was a header that made Derek's blood run cold. Project Silent Earth Biological Integration Protocol. Jesus, Marcus whispered, scanning the document. Derek, look at this. The report outlined a multi-phase program designed to expose selected military personnel to what it termed symbiotic biological agents, discovered during archaeological excavations. The stated goal was to create soldiers capable of surviving in environments that would be lethal to normal humans. Derek read aloud from one section. Phase 3 subjects show remarkable adaptation to extreme temperature variations, enhanced sensory perception, and accelerated healing from traumatic injuries. Integration appears to be permanent, with subjects retaining capabilities indefinitely. Integration, Dr. Chen repeated, not infection. Integration. They turned us into test Subjects, Marcus said, his voice carrying the controlled anger Derek remembered from their military days. The environmental missions, the contamination sites, it was all cover for human experimentation. Dr. Chen pulled out another document, this one bearing the signature of someone with the title Project Director. According to James's research, Silent Earth involved at least 12 different excavation sites across 6 continents. Each site was discovered to contain what the reports call dormant biological networks embedded in ancient geological formations. The structures we found underground, Derek said, pieces of memory clicking into place. They weren't contamination, they were technology. Biological technology that had been waiting for someone to find it. But why us specifically? Marcus asked. Why environmental specialists? Dr. Chen turned to a page that showed a world map marked with red pins. Because environmental personnel could access restricted sites without arousing suspicion, and because you already had hazmat training that could be adapted to protect you during the initial exposure phases. Derek studied the map, noting that one of the pins was located at coordinates that looked familiar. Marcus, this pin isn't this near where we were deployed. Marcus compared the coordinates to notes he'd made from his own research. It's exact. Derek, they sent us to that specific location because they knew what we'd find there. And they knew what it would do to us, Derek added, feeling a mixture of rage and betrayal that threatened to overwhelm his tactical thinking. Doctor Chen closed the folders and looked directly at both men. There's more. James left contact information for other veterans he'd been in touch with. People from different units, different time periods, but all exposed to similar biological agents at excavation sites around the world. She handed Derek a slip of paper with phone numbers and email addresses. He called it the network veterans who'd been changed by their service and were trying to understand what had been done to them. How many? Derek asked, based on his research, possibly hundreds. But James believed that most of them didn't understand the connection between their symptoms and their military service. The symptoms often take years to manifest, and the military has been very effective at discouraging veterans from discussing classified operations. Marcus stood and walked to the window, staring out at the dark street beyond. Dr. Chen, you've seen Derek's condition progress over the past day. In your medical opinion, what are we dealing with? Honestly, I've never seen anything like it in medical literature. But based on the tissue samples I've been able to analyze, I don't think what's happening to you is harmful. The biological structures seem to be integrating with your existing physiology in ways that enhance rather than degrade function. Enhanced how? Derek asked. Increased cellular regeneration, improved neural conductivity, and what appears to be the development of entirely new sensory capabilities. Derek, when you touched the examination table yesterday, your skin temperature changed in response to the metal's thermal properties. That's not normal human physiology. Derek looked down at his hands, noticing for the first time that his fingertips had developed faint hexagonal patterns that seemed to shift slightly when he wasn't looking directly at them. There's something else, Dr. Chen continued. The tissue samples I've analyzed show electromagnetic properties. You're developing the ability to interface directly with certain types of electronic systems. As if to demonstrate her point, lights in the office flickered briefly. Derek felt a strange tingling in his modified tissue, as if it was responding to the electrical systems in the building. That's been happening more frequently, he admitted. Electronics behaving strangely when I'm around them. Marcus returned to his seat, his expression grim. So we're not dying. We're evolving. The question is, into what? Dr. Chen pulled out one final document from James Kowalski's envelope, a letter written in his handwriting. He left this for whoever came after him. It might help answer that question. Derek took the letter and read aloud. To my fellow subjects, by the time you read this, you'll understand that what's happening to us isn't random or accidental. We were chosen because our military records showed psychological profiles compatible with biological integration. The changes we're experiencing are permanent, but they're not the end goal. We're being prepared for something larger. The excavation. Sites around the world aren't separate projects. They're components of a single system that's been dormant for thousands of years. Our integration isn't just changing us, it's waking that system up. Find the others. Learn to use your new capabilities. And remember that the people who did this to us aren't necessarily our enemies. Sometimes evolution requires catalysts. That office fell silent as the implications of Kowalski's words settled over them. Derek felt his condition pulse with renewed intensity, as if responding to the revelation of its true purpose. "Dr. Chen," he said finally, "we're going to need your help to find the others. And we're going to need to do it before whoever is running Silent Earth decides we know too much." The drive to Marcus's safe house took them through winding mountain roads that Derek had traveled countless times. But tonight, the familiar landscape felt different. His enhanced senses picked up details he'd never noticed: the electrical fields generated by power lines, the electromagnetic signatures of cell towers, even the faint bioelectric patterns of wildlife moving through the forest. Marcus had rented a cabin under an assumed name, paying cash and avoiding any documentation that could be traced back to his real identity. The small structure sat in a clearing 20 miles from the nearest neighbor, surrounded by old-growth forest that provided both isolation and natural barriers to electronic surveillance. Inside, the cabin had been transformed into a command center. Maps covered every wall, marked with pins and connecting strings that resembled a detective's investigation board. Multiple laptops sat open on a makeshift desk, their screens displaying encrypted communications channels and research databases that Derek recognized from their military days. "Welcome to the Resistance," Marcus said with dark humor, gesturing toward the organized chaos. "I've been building this network for 6 months, ever since I realized what was happening to us." Dr. Chen moved to one of the maps, studying the pattern of marked locations. "These are all excavation sites?" "Every one. 27 confirmed locations across 6 continents, all discovered and investigated within the past 15 years. And Sarah," Marcus had started using Dr. Chen's first name, a sign that he'd decided to trust her completely. Every single site had military personnel involved in the investigation, and every unit included specialists who later developed symptoms like ours. Derek examined a laptop screen that showed a secure video chat interface. Several windows were active, displaying the faces of people he didn't recognize, but whose expressions carried the same wariness he'd been seeing in his own mirror. "The network," Marcus explained. "Veterans from different units, different countries even, but all exposed to the same biological agents. We've been sharing information and trying to piece together the full scope of Silent Earth." One of the video windows showed a woman in her 30s with short blonde hair and intense blue eyes. She was speaking, but Derek couldn't hear the audio until Marcus adjusted the volume. It confirmed that the Beijing site was excavated in 2019 with Chinese military personnel reporting similar integration symptoms approximately 18 months later. The pattern is consistent across all documented sites. Marcus addressed the screen. "Phoenix and our medical contact have joined us. Phoenix, meet Spectre. She served with Canadian forces at the Greenland site." The woman called Spectre nodded toward Derek's image on her screen. "Phoenix, we've been tracking your situation since your medical contact became active. How advanced is your integration?" Derek looked down at his leg, where the honeycomb patterns had continued to spread despite the bandaging. "Significant progression in the past 24 hours. Enhanced sensory capabilities. Electromagnetic sensitivity." "Good," Spectre replied. That means your biology is compatible with the full integration process. Some of our people have experienced rejection symptoms. Rejection symptoms? Dr. Chen asked. Another voice joined the conversation. A man with a heavy accent who identified himself as Phantom, formerly of the Australian CIS. Doc, about 30% of exposed personnel experience immune system reactions to prevent full integration. Their bodies treat the biological agents as foreign invaders and attempt to purge them. The process is invariably fatal. Derek felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Fatal how? Complete cellular breakdown, Phantom continued. The modified tissue begins destroying healthy cells, spreading like an aggressive cancer. Most subjects die within weeks of onset. Marcus pulled up another screen showing medical records and death certificates. Rodriguez, Hendricks, and Torres our teammates who died. I think they experienced rejection symptoms. But why? Derek asked. What determines compatibility? Spector's image leaned closer to her camera. That's what we've been trying to figure out. The only common factor we've identified is psychological rather than physical. All successful integrations involve personnel who tested high for adaptability and low for authoritarian obedience during military psychological evaluations. Dr. Chen looked up from the notes she'd been taking. That suggests the selection criteria weren't just about military skills. They were specifically looking for people who could adapt to fundamental changes in their biology without psychological breakdown. Independent thinkers, Marcus added. People who could handle the truth when they eventually figured out what had been done to them. Derek studied the faces on the video screens, noting the same combination of wariness and determination he felt. In himself, what's the endgame? What are we supposed to become? Phantom's expression grew grave. That's where things get complicated. We've been analyzing the biological structures from the excavation sites, and they're not just random organic technology. They form components of a much larger system. The screen switched to display what looked like a three-dimensional map of the Earth with glowing lines connecting the various excavation sites. The sites aren't scattered randomly. They form a network. A global communication and monitoring system that's been dormant for thousands of years. Monitoring what? Derek asked. Environmental changes, atmospheric conditions, tectonic activity, essentially. Everything that affects the planet's ability to support life. But here's the crucial part. The system was designed to interface with biological entities. Entities like us. Dr. Chen set down her pen, her scientific training warring with the implications of what she was hearing. You're suggesting that this network was built by some previous civilization, and that you're being modified to operate it? Not built by, Spector corrected. Built for. The archaeological evidence suggests that these biological networks have been embedded in the Earth's geology for much longer than human civilization has existed. Whatever created them intended for them to interface with intelligent biological life. Marcus brought up another screen showing geological surveys and climate data. And the timing of the excavations isn't coincidental. Every site was discovered and activated during a period of accelerating environmental degradation. Rising sea levels, increasing atmospheric toxicity, mass extinction events. Derek felt pieces of understanding clicking together like components of a weapon being assembled. The network is waking up because the planet is in crisis. And they're modifying us to serve as its interface with human civilization. That's our working theory, Phantom confirmed. The question is whether the people running Silent Earth understand this, or if they think they're just creating enhanced soldiers. The video chat fell silent as the implications settled over everyone involved. Derek looked around the cabin, taking in the faces of people who had become unwilling participants in something far larger than military experimentation. There's something else, he said finally. I've been experiencing what I can only describe as environmental awareness. I can sense electromagnetic fields, temperature changes, even what feels like the movement of water through soil. What if these aren't just random abilities? What if we're developing the capability to interface directly with natural systems? Marcus nodded slowly. Like biological sensors for a planetary monitoring network. Exactly. And if that's true, then we need to figure out how to use these abilities before someone else decides we're too dangerous to let live. Dr. Chen's laptop chimed with an incoming email that made her face go pale. She stared at the screen for several seconds before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek, Marcus, you need to see this. The email was from Dr. Elizabeth Reeves at the Centers for Disease Control, a name Derek didn't recognize, but whose credentials filled half the screen. The subject line read, Urgent. Regarding your inquiries about unusual tissue formations in veterans. Dr. Chen read aloud. Dr. Chen, your research requests have been flagged by our biodefense monitoring systems. The symptoms you described are not indicative of pathogenic infection or contamination exposure. They represent successful adaptation to symbiotic organisms designed to protect human hosts from environmental toxins that are currently threatening global population survival. I need to speak with you and your patients immediately. Lives depend on understanding what's happening to these individuals. The room fell silent. Marcus was the first to speak. It's a trap. Has to be. Government scientists trying to lure us into official custody. But Derek found himself studying the email more carefully. Marcus, look at the technical details in her message. She's not describing our condition as a problem to be solved. She's calling it successful adaptation. Dr. Chen scrolled down to reveal an attachment, a research paper with Dr. Reeves as the primary author. The title made Derek's breath catch. Biological Networks as Planetary Defense Systems. Evidence from archaeological sites in Central Asia. She's been studying the excavation sites, Dr. Chen said, opening the document, but not as part of Silent Earth. This research is independent. The paper contained photographs that Derek recognized immediately, images of the underground chambers from their Marsh mission, but taken from different angles and at different times. More importantly, the analysis presented a completely different interpretation of what they'd found. Dr. Reeves' research suggested that the biological networks weren't ancient alien technology, but rather a natural evolutionary response to previous mass extinction events. According to her analysis, the symbiotic organisms had evolved to interface with intelligent species during periods of environmental crisis, enhancing their host's ability to survive catastrophic changes. Listen to this, Dr. Chen continued reading. Carbon dating indicates these networks activated during previous extinction events, including the Permian extinction 250 million years ago, and the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction that eliminated the dinosaurs. The organisms appear to select host species with the highest probability of survival and adaptation, then modify them to serve as environmental sensors and potential survivors. Marcus sat down heavily. She's saying we're not test subjects. We're being prepared for survival. The video chat screens came alive as the other network members reacted to this revelation. Spector's voice carried a note of excitement. That changes everything. If the organisms are naturally occurring and designed to help rather than exploit us, then the military isn't controlling this process. Phantom's Australian accent carried skepticism. But if that's true, then what's Silent Earth really about? Why the secrecy and the elimination of team members? Derek felt his condition pulse with sudden intensity, and for a moment, his awareness expanded beyond the cabin. He could sense the electromagnetic fields of their electronic equipment, the bioelectric patterns of his companions, and something else, a vast network of similar signatures scattered across the continent. I think I understand, Derek said slowly. The military didn't create this situation. They discovered it. and they've been trying to control it because they don't understand what they're dealing with. Dr. Chen's phone rang. The caller ID showed Dr. Reeves' CDC number. "Answer it," Derek said. But put it on speaker. Dr. Reeves' voice carried urgency and professional authority. "Dr. Chen, I need you to listen carefully. The veterans you're treating are part of a natural biological process that began approximately 50,000 years ago. The organisms integrating with their tissue aren't foreign invaders. They're evolutionary partners that activate during periods of severe environmental stress." "Dr. Reeves," Dr. Chen replied, "I have 2 of those veterans here with me, along with others via secure video link. They need to hear this directly." "Perfect. Gentlemen, my name is Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, and I've been studying your condition for the past 3 years. The first thing you need to understand is that you're not dying, and you're not being turned into weapons. You're being prepared to survive." Derek leaned toward the phone. "Survive what?" "Environmental collapse that began accelerating approximately 15 years ago. Atmospheric toxicity levels, oceanic acidification, and soil contamination have reached thresholds that will make the planet largely uninhabitable for unmodified humans within the next 2 decades. The statement hung in the air like a physical weight. Marcus found his voice first. "You're talking about human extinction." "I'm talking about the 6th mass extinction event in Earth's history, and we're currently in the early stages. But unlike previous extinctions, this one is being monitored and managed by biological systems that have been preparing for exactly this scenario for millions of years." Dr. Reeves continued, her voice taking on the tone of someone delivering information that would reshape everything. "The excavation sites that exposed you to the organisms weren't discovered randomly. The networks have been actively drawing attention to themselves, using electromagnetic signatures and geological anomalies to attract investigation by species with the technological capability to find them." Derek felt pieces of memory shifting again, but this time the fragments formed a clearer picture. "The local guides at our site. They weren't warning us away from contamination. They were trying to tell us something was calling to us." "Exactly. The organisms identify individuals with the genetic and psychological profiles most compatible with integration, then influence circumstances to bring them into contact with activation sites." Spector's voice came through the video chat. "Dr. Reeves, are you saying we were selected?" "I'm saying you were recruited by a biological intelligence that has been managing planetary survival for far longer than human civilization has existed. And gentlemen, the integration you're experiencing is just the first phase." Dr. Chen looked around the room, taking in the faces of people whose understanding of reality was being fundamentally altered. "What's the second phase?" "Learning to interface directly with the planetary monitoring network. Your enhanced sensory capabilities aren't random. They're developing along specific lines that will allow you to assess environmental conditions across vast areas and coordinate responses to ecological threats." Derek stood and walked to the window, staring out at the forest that suddenly felt like part of a much larger organism. "And the people running Silent Earth? They believe they're conducting military experiments to create enhanced soldiers. They don't understand that they're actually facilitating a natural process that was going to happen regardless of human intervention. The organisms would have found other ways to activate if the military excavations hadn't provided convenient opportunities." Marcus joined Derek at the window. "Dr. Reeves, what happened to our teammates who died?" "Biological incompatibility. Not everyone can successfully integrate with the organisms. Those who can't experience immune system rejection that is invariably fatal. I'm sorry for your losses, but their deaths were not intentional." Derek pressed his palm against the window glass, feeling a strange resonance between his modified tissue and something vast and patient that seemed to extend through the earth itself. Dr. Reeves, how many of us are there? Globally? Approximately 800 successful integrations, with more occurring every month as additional sites are discovered and activated. You're not alone in this process, and you're not victims of it. You're partners in the most important biological adaptation in human history. The phone call ended with arrangements to meet Dr. Reeves at a secure location, but Derek remained at the window, processing the implications of everything they'd learned. The anger he'd felt toward the military was being replaced by something more complex, a sense of purpose that felt both terrifying and inevitable. "Marcus," he said quietly, "I don't think we're soldiers anymore. I think we're something entirely new." The meeting with Dr. Reeves was set for dawn at an abandoned research station in the Cascade Mountains, a location chosen for its isolation and proximity to one of the dormant network nodes she'd been studying. Derek spent the hours before departure trying to process the magnitude of what they'd learned, while his body continued its transformation at an accelerating pace. The honeycomb patterns had spread across his entire left leg and were beginning to appear on his torso, but rather than feeling invaded or compromised, Derek experienced a growing sense of connection to something vast and ancient that seemed to pulse beneath the surface of the world. Marcus emerged from the cabin's makeshift communication center with grim news. "I've lost contact with 3 more network members in the past 6 hours. Phantom, Echo, and Ranger have all gone dark." Dr. Chen looked up from the medical notes she'd been compiling. Equipment failure? Unlikely. Their last transmissions all mentioned the same thing: sudden government interest in their locations. Black SUVs, federal agents asking questions about their military service and recent medical consultations. Derek felt his enhanced senses detect the approach of vehicles before he heard them. 3 engines moving up the mountain road with the steady precision of official transport. "We have company. Half a mile out, approaching fast." Marcus immediately began shutting down equipment while Dr. Chen gathered her research files. But Derek found himself oddly calm, as if his modified biology was providing information about the approaching threat that his conscious mind hadn't yet processed. "Wait," he said, holding up a hand. "I don't think they're here for us specifically. The electromagnetic signatures are wrong for surveillance equipment, and I'm not detecting the kind of radio chatter you'd expect from an arrest operation." Through the window, Derek watched 3 black SUVs pull into the clearing, but instead of the tactical teams he'd expected, the vehicles disgorged a mix of civilians and military personnel who moved with purpose but not aggression. A woman in her 50s stepped forward, her bearing and confidence immediately identifying her as someone accustomed to command. Behind her came 2 people in civilian clothes who carried themselves like scientists, and a man in military fatigues whose insignia marked him as a colonel. "Dr. Elizabeth Reeves," Marcus said, recognizing her from photographs in her research papers. The group approached the cabin with their hands clearly visible, a gesture designed to communicate non-hostile intentions. Dr. Reeves called out when they were still 20 feet away. "Mr. Rains, Mr. Webb, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Reeves. I believe we have critical information to share that can't wait for our scheduled meeting." Derek opened the cabin door, his enhanced senses confirming that none of the approaching individuals carried weapons or surveillance equipment. "Dr. Reeves, your timing is interesting. Mr. Rains, we've been monitoring communication intercepts from Silent Earth operations. There's going to be a coordinated effort to retrieve all known integration subjects within the next 48 hours. Not for debriefing, for termination." The colonel stepped forward, removing his hat to reveal graying hair and the weathered features of someone who'd spent decades in field operations. "I'm Colonel James Mitchell, formerly of the unit that initiated Project Silent Earth. Dr. Reeves approached me 3 months ago with evidence that we'd fundamentally misunderstood what we were dealing with." Marcus kept his distance, his military instincts warring with curiosity. "Colonel, with respect, Forgive me if I don't immediately trust someone involved in turning us into test subjects. Mr. Webb, you were never test subjects. You were recruits. Though we didn't understand that at the time. Colonel Mitchell's voice carried the weight of someone delivering difficult truths. Project Silent Earth was initiated after we discovered that the biological networks at excavation sites were actively seeking contact with human military personnel. One of the civilian scientists, a younger man with the intense focus of someone who spent most of his time looking at data, stepped forward with a tablet computer. My name is Dr. James Park, Geological Survey Specialist. Sir, the networks aren't passive archaeological artifacts. They're active communication systems that have been broadcasting electromagnetic signals designed to attract human attention. Derek studied the data on Dr. Park's tablet, which showed signal patterns that his modified nervous system seemed to recognize at some fundamental level. They were calling to us. Exactly, Dr. Reeves confirmed. The organisms don't randomly infect humans who encounter them. They evaluate potential hosts and only initiate integration with individuals who meet specific criteria: genetic compatibility, psychological adaptability, and most importantly, the potential to serve as effective interfaces between human civilization and planetary biological systems. Dr. Chen emerged from the cabin carrying her research files. Dr. Reeves, I've been documenting the progression of symptoms in these patients. The biological changes aren't causing degradation. They're creating enhancement. That's correct. Dr. Chen, your patients are developing capabilities that will allow them to directly interface with environmental monitoring systems that span the entire planet. But the current leadership of Silent Earth doesn't understand this. They believe they're dealing with a biological weapon that needs to be contained. Colonel Mitchell's expression grew grave, which is why they've authorized termination protocols for all integration subjects. They're planning to eliminate everyone who's been exposed, including the military personnel who've been investigating the sites. Derek felt his condition pulse with sudden alarm, as if the organisms within his tissue were responding to the threat. How many people are we talking about? Globally? Nearly 1,000 individuals at various stages of integration, Dr. Reeves replied. And Mr. Rains, the organisms are aware of the threat. They're accelerating the integration process in response to the danger their hosts are facing. As if to confirm her words, Derek felt his modifications activate with unprecedented intensity. His awareness expanded beyond the immediate area, and for several seconds, he could sense the electromagnetic signatures of other integrated individuals across vast distances, points of light in a network that spanned continents. It's starting, he said quietly. I can feel the others. They're scared, but they're also connecting to something larger. Dr. Park consulted his tablet. Sir, we're detecting massive increases in electromagnetic activity at dormant network sites around the world. The entire system appears to be activating in response to the threat. Dr. Reeves nodded grimly. The biological networks have been dormant for thousands of years, but they're designed to activate during periods of crisis. The planned elimination of integration subjects has triggered a planetary defense response. Marcus moved to Derek's side, noting the way his friend's eyes had begun to show flecks of the same bioluminescence they'd seen in his tissue samples. Derek, are you all right? I'm connected, Derek replied, his voice carrying harmonics that hadn't been there minutes before. I can sense environmental conditions across hundreds of miles. Ocean temperatures, atmospheric composition, soil toxicity levels, it's all flowing through the network, and the network is using us as interface points. Colonel Mitchell exchanged glances with Dr. Reeves. Doctor, how long do we have before the termination protocols are implemented? Based on intercepted communications, strike teams will begin operations at 0600 tomorrow. They have locations for approximately 60% of known integration subjects, including everyone in this room. Derek felt himself becoming a conduit for information that flowed through channels he was only beginning to understand. The sensation was overwhelming but not unpleasant, like becoming part of a vast consciousness that had been waiting patiently for him to develop the capability to participate. "There's something else," he said, his enhanced awareness picking up signals that his companions couldn't perceive. The networks aren't just monitoring environmental conditions. They're actively working to counteract the damage. Atmospheric scrubbers, oceanic pH buffers, soil remediation systems, all biological, all integrated into natural ecosystems. Dr. Reeves smiled for the first time since her arrival. "Mr. Rains, you're beginning to interface directly with planetary management systems that have been operating autonomously for millennia. But those systems work more effectively when they can coordinate with intelligent biological entities. Entities like us," Marcus said, understanding dawning in his expression. "Exactly. The integration process isn't preparing you for survival in a damaged world. It's preparing you to help repair the damage." Derek stood and walked to the center of the cabin, feeling his modifications resonate with the presence of his companions and the vast network that connected them all. "Then we're not running from the termination teams. We're going to stop them." Colonel Mitchell's military bearings straightened. "Mr. Rains, with respect, you're talking about engaging federal forces in direct confrontation." "No, Colonel. I'm talking about protecting a biological process that's trying to save the planet. The question is whether you're going to help us or get out of our way." As dawn approached, Derek realized that the scared veteran who had walked into Dr. Chen's clinic was gone, replaced by something that was still fundamentally human, but enhanced by partnership with systems older than civilization itself. The real battle was just beginning. The abandoned research station sat in a mountain valley like a concrete monument to forgotten science, its brutalist architecture weathered by decades of alpine storms. Derek approached the facility with his senses operating at levels that would have seemed impossible days earlier, detecting the electromagnetic signatures of surveillance equipment hidden throughout the surrounding forest. 18 positions, he reported to Marcus, who was coordinating their defensive preparations through the network's encrypted communications. "Standard tactical positioning, but they're equipped with equipment I don't recognize. Something that's generating interference patterns designed to disrupt biological electromagnetic fields." Dr. Reeves checked the readings on her portable monitoring station. "They've developed countermeasures specifically targeted at integrated individuals. The termination protocols aren't just about elimination. They're about preventing the network from coordinating a defense." Derek felt the vast consciousness he'd been interfacing with flicker and dim as the interference patterns intensified. The sensation was like losing a sense he'd only just discovered, leaving him feeling isolated and diminished. "It's working," he said grimly. "I'm losing connection with the other nodes." Colonel Mitchell emerged from the research station's command center, where he'd been using his military contacts to track the incoming strike teams. "We have 20 minutes before the first wave arrives. Mr. Rains, Dr. Reeves believes that direct contact with the network's central interface could override the jamming equipment." The central interface was housed in a chamber 30 feet beneath the research station, accessed through a maintenance tunnel that descended into the mountain's bedrock. According to Dr. Reeves' research, it was one of the oldest and most powerful nodes in the entire global network, dormant for centuries but still connected to the vast biological web that spanned continents. Derek made his way down the narrow tunnel, his modified tissue beginning to resonate as he approached the interface chamber. The walls around him were lined with the same hexagonal patterns he carried in his own flesh, but these formations pulsed with bioluminescent energy that seemed to respond to his presence. The chamber itself defied description. What Dr. Reeves had called an interface looked more like a living cathedral, Its walls formed from biological structures that seemed to shift and flow like captured lightning. At the center of the space, a pillar of what appeared to be crystallized neural tissue rose from floor to ceiling, surrounded by smaller formations that resembled both coral and circuitry. When Derek placed his palm against the central pillar, the world exploded into sensation. His consciousness expanded instantly across hundreds of miles, connecting him to every integrated individual in the network. He could feel Marcus's steady presence above him, Dr. Chen's scientific curiosity blazing like a beacon, and dozens of other minds scattered across the continent, all of them linked through biological systems that had been waiting for this moment for thousands of years. But more than that, Derek could sense the planet itself. Through the network's vast sensory web, he experienced the rhythm of oceanic currents, the chemical composition of the atmosphere, the slow pulse of geological processes that operated on timescales beyond human comprehension. And underlying it all was a presence ancient, patient, and utterly focused on the preservation of life in all its forms. The strike team's jamming equipment became irrelevant in the face of this direct connection. Derek felt the network's defensive systems coming online, biological processes that had been dormant for millennia, suddenly stirring to protect their newly awakened partners above ground. The first wave of attackers encountered something they hadn't anticipated. The forest itself seemed to turn against them. Electromagnetic fields disrupted their communications. Unusual atmospheric conditions interfered with their targeting systems, and the very ground beneath their feet began to shift in ways that defied tactical planning. Marcus's voice reached Derek through the network connection. "Phoenix, whatever you're doing down there, it's working. The strike teams are falling back to regroup." But Derek could sense that this was only the beginning. Through the network, he detected massive military resources being mobilized worldwide, a coordinated effort to eliminate every integrated individual before the planetary defense systems could fully activate. "They don't understand," Derek transmitted back through the biological channels that now felt as natural as speech. "They think we're the threat, but we're trying to save them too." The ancient presence in the network pulsed with something that felt like agreement, and Derek realized he was interfacing not just with a monitoring system, but with a form of consciousness that had been shepherding life on Earth since before humans existed. The real battle was about to begin. Derek's consciousness merged completely with the planetary network, and through that connection, he experienced the Earth as a living organism fighting for its survival. The ancient intelligence guiding the system wasn't alien, it was terrestrial, evolved over billions of years to maintain the delicate balance that allowed life to flourish. But that balance was failing. Through the network's global sensory web, Derek witnessed the accelerating collapse of ecosystems worldwide. Ocean temperatures rising beyond the tolerance of marine life, atmospheric toxicity reaching levels that would make the planet uninhabitable within decades, soil contamination spreading faster than any natural process could remediate. The Earth was dying, and it had been preparing for this crisis for millennia. The network isn't just monitoring environmental collapse, Derek transmitted to his companions above. It's been implementing countermeasures for thousands of years, using biological systems to maintain atmospheric composition, regulate ocean chemistry, process industrial toxins. Marcus's response came through the connection with crystal clarity. And now it needs us to coordinate those systems directly. "More than that," Derek replied, his awareness expanding to encompass the full scope of the planetary defense response. "It needs us to interface with human civilization, to convince people to work with the biological systems instead of against them." Above ground, the second wave of strike teams had arrived with more sophisticated equipment. Through the network, Derek could sense their approach: soldiers equipped with biological warfare gear, electromagnetic pulse weapons designed to disrupt the network's communications, and most ominously, devices that generated targeted radiation to kill the symbiotic organisms. Dr. Reeves' voice reached him through both the network connection and the research station's communication system. Derek, they're not just trying to eliminate integrated individuals. They're planning to attack the network nodes directly. The implication hit Derek like a physical blow. If the military succeeded in destroying enough nodes, the planetary biological systems would lose the coordination they needed to maintain environmental stability. The Earth's natural defense mechanisms would collapse just when they were most needed. Through his connection with the central interface, Derek felt the ancient consciousness make a decision that resonated through every biological system on the planet. Dormant nodes around the world began activating simultaneously, their electromagnetic signatures powerful enough to disrupt satellite communications and interfere with military operations globally. But the network's response wasn't aggressive. It was protective. Derek watched through countless biological sensors as defensive systems came online. Atmospheric processors that began rapidly scrubbing industrial toxins from the air. Oceanic microorganisms that started neutralizing acidification. Soil bacteria that accelerated the breakdown of persistent pollutants. It's not fighting them, Derek realized, transmitting his understanding to the other integrated individuals worldwide. It's trying to save the planet they're living on, even while they're attacking it. The strike team's assault on the research station intensified, but their weapons proved less effective than anticipated. The network had learned to adapt their countermeasures in real time, using the electromagnetic fields generated by their own equipment against them. Derek felt himself becoming a conduit for communication between the ancient planetary consciousness and the human military forces above. Through his enhanced awareness, he detected the confusion and growing fear among the strike teams as their equipment failed, and their mission parameters became increasingly irrelevant. "Dr. Reeves," he transmitted, "patch me through to whoever's commanding this operation. They need to understand what they're really fighting." The connection took several minutes to establish, complicated by the electromagnetic interference the network was generating to protect itself. When the link finally opened, Derek found himself speaking directly to a general whose voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "This is General Morrison, Joint Chiefs of Staff. Identify yourself." "General, my name is Derek Rains, former Sergeant First Class, Environmental Surveillance Specialist." "Sir, you need to call off this operation immediately. You're not attacking a biological weapon. You're interfering with a planetary life support system. Sergeant Rains, you've been compromised by hostile biological agents. We're here to extract you and neutralize the threat." Derek felt the vast network pulse around him, its ancient patience beginning to wear thin as military forces worldwide continued their assault on critical nodes. "General, with respect, the only threat here is to the survival of every living thing on this planet. The organisms you're trying to destroy are the only reason we still have breathable air and drinkable water." Through the network connection, Derek transmitted a stream of environmental data directly to the general's communication equipment. Real-time atmospheric readings, oceanic chemistry reports, soil contamination levels that painted a picture of planetary crisis far beyond anything in official government assessments. The silence that followed lasted nearly a minute. "Sergeant Rains," the general's voice had lost its certainty. "What exactly are you proposing?" Derek felt the ancient consciousness stir with something that might have been hope. "I'm proposing a partnership, sir, between human civilization and the biological systems that have been keeping this planet habitable for billions of years. We can still save the Earth, but only if we work with the network instead of against it." The moment of decision had arrived. 6 months after the confrontation at the research station, Derek stood in what had once been Murphy's Auto Repair. now transformed into something that looked more like a hybrid between a garage and a laboratory. The familiar scent of motor oil still lingered, but it was mixed with ozone and the subtle electrical smell that accompanied active biological interfaces. The old workbench where he'd once repaired carburetors now housed monitoring equipment that displayed real-time environmental data from across the Pacific Northwest. Through his enhanced senses, Derek could track atmospheric conditions, oceanic temperatures, and soil chemistry levels with a precision that would have required satellite networks. Just months earlier, Dr. Chen emerged from what had been Murphy's cramped office, now expanded into a proper medical facility where she treated both integrated individuals and civilians experiencing environmental sensitivities. Her research into human network interfaces had earned her recognition from medical institutions worldwide, though she still preferred the practical work of helping people adapt to a rapidly changing world. Derek, the integration success rates are improving, she reported, checking data on a tablet that interfaced seamlessly with the biological monitoring systems. We're seeing fewer rejection cases now that we understand the psychological factors involved. Derek nodded, though his attention was partially focused on the vast network of consciousness that connected him to hundreds of other integrated individuals around the globe. The sensation had become as natural as breathing, a constant background. Awareness of the planet's vital signs and the efforts being made to heal decades of environmental damage. "Any word from Dr. Reeves about the Antarctic project?" he asked. "The ice shelf stabilization is ahead of schedule. The biological systems they've introduced are binding the glacial structures more effectively than anyone predicted. We might actually be able to reverse some of the sea level rise." Through the open garage doors, Derek could see the forest that surrounded what had once been the town of Millfield. The trees grew larger and healthier than they had before the network's activation. Their root systems now connected to biological processors that cleaned groundwater and neutralized industrial contaminants that had been poisoning the soil for decades. Rita Kozlov waved from across the clearing where her cabin had been expanded into a research station, studying the psychological effects of human network integration. At 71, she had volunteered for the integration process despite the risks, claiming that anyone who had survived 30 years of teaching middle school could handle a little biological enhancement. "Derek," Rita called, walking toward the garage with the confident stride of someone whose arthritis had been cured by symbiotic organisms that repaired damaged tissue as efficiently as they monitored environmental conditions. "Marcus is on the secure channel. Says he has updates from the European sites." Derek touched the interface panel that had grown from what was once a simple phone system, feeling his consciousness connect instantly with Marcus, who was coordinating network activities across multiple continents. "Phoenix," Marcus's voice carried the satisfaction of someone whose work had found genuine purpose. "The Mediterranean cleanup is showing remarkable progress. The biological processors have reduced oceanic acidity by 12% in just 4 months. Any resistance from local governments?" Derek asked. "Less than expected. When people see their coastal waters becoming clear again and fish populations returning, they tend to be more receptive to biological enhancement programs." Through the network connection, Derek could sense the activity at dozens of integration sites worldwide. Former military personnel who had been marked for termination 6 months ago were now serving as coordinators between human civilization and planetary biological systems, helping to implement environmental restoration programs that operated at a scale and speed that conventional technology could never match. The doorbell chimed, sound that had been modified to harmonize with the electromagnetic frequencies generated by the biological interfaces. Derek looked up to see a family approaching the garage, parents in their 30s with 2 young children, who watched the glowing hexagonal patterns on the building's walls with wide-eyed curiosity. "Mr. Raines?" The father stepped forward hesitantly. "We heard you might be able to help us. Our daughter has been experiencing some unusual sensitivities since we moved here. She says she can feel when storms are coming days in advance, and she seems to know when the water quality changes." Derek smiled, recognizing the early signs of spontaneous integration that were becoming more common as the network expanded its reach. Children, it turned out, adapted to biological enhancement far more easily than adults, their developing nervous systems readily accepting symbiotic partnerships that enhanced rather than replaced human capabilities. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Derek asked, kneeling to the girl's eye level. "Emma," she replied, then whispered, "I can hear the trees talking to each other." Derek felt the network pulse with gentle amusement. The biological systems had a particular affinity for young humans, perhaps recognizing them as the generation that would inherit a planet transformed by the partnership between human intelligence and ancient biological wisdom. "Emma, would you like to learn how to talk back to them?" As the family settled into the garage's comfortable seating area, Derek reflected on how completely his life had changed. The scared veteran who had walked into Dr. Chen's clinic 6 months ago had been replaced by someone who served as a bridge between two forms of consciousness, human and planetary, that were learning to work together for their mutual survival. Outside, the sun was setting behind mountains that housed dozens of network nodes, their biological processors working constantly to repair atmospheric damage and restore ecological balance. The future remained uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt hopeful. Derek's enhanced senses detected the approach of evening rain, and through the network connection, he felt similar precipitation beginning across the continent water that would be cleaner than it had been in decades, falling on soil that was learning to heal itself. He was home.